Lately, many people have been talking about his most pure love. I couldn't help but think of him. To marry me, he defied his entire family, gave up his wealthy life as a young master, lived in the cheapest single room, and took on a job he had never even considered before. But he would still be happy for me, spending an entire day's wages to buy me flowers. Meanwhile, he could only eat the cheapest instant noodles. So, at that moment, I decided that I would marry him and only him for the rest of my life. Later, I got my wish, and after 6 years of marriage, he still gave me the best things and the best status. My gaze slowly shifted to the photo on the table, where he was wearing the black shirt I designed for him, holding another woman in his arm. Her hand was reaching into his loose shirt. Suddenly, I laughed. Laugh, how deep does the emotion have to be considered true love? In the middle of the night, Ethan came home drunk. He frowned, threw his suit jacket on the sofa, then turned to look at me sitting at the dining table. "Didn't I tell you not to wait for me?" Hearing his impatient tone, my heart sank. No matter how busy he was before, he would always come home to eat with me. I looked up at the cold food on the table and asked softly, "Where did you go today? Why did you drink so much?" He sat on the sofa, pinched his nose, and said, "Business." He didn't want to say anything else. After asking, I smiled lightly and turned to look at him. 6 years had passed, and he was still as handsome as ever, with little change. The only difference was that since taking over the company, his demeanor had become more composed. "Ethan, you've disappointed me again." He immediately looked up at me, but in that moment, I could no longer see the intense love that once burned in his eyes. Now, there was only the coldness of the past. He frowned and said, "Sophia, stop being unreasonable. I'm already tired from the business meeting. I don't want to argue with you." I didn't say anything, but my hands clenched tightly in his embrace, my nails digging into his skin. Since Xiao Bao was 2 years old, the arguments between us have become more frequent. And I don't know how many tears I've shed. At first, he was willing to explain patiently, but later, he just stopped coming home. He seemed to think that this would avoid arguments. But he never cared about the reasons behind our arguments, like the women's perfume on his body, the lipstick in the car, or the earrings in the room that weren't mine. Even today, the lipstick mark on his neck is still there. I took a deep breath and mustered the courage to say those words. "Ethan, let's get a divorce." Ethan stood up abruptly, walked over to me, turned my chair around, and looked at me seriously. "Say that again." I forced myself to look up at him, struggling to hold back my tears. "I want a divorce." With a loud crash, he knocked all the food off the table onto the floor. I was startled, and before I could react, Ethan grabbed my shoulders. He frowned and asked, "Is it because I came home a little late today, Sophia? How did I never notice you were so petty?" I pushed him away forcefully, about to take out my phone to show him the photo. When little Bao woke up upstairs, "Daddy, you're back," he said, then rushed down the stairs. Ethan's expression changed instantly, quickly hugging little Bao. "Little Bao, why did you wake up?" Little Bao said in a spoiled voice while in his arms. "Because I dreamed Daddy came back, so I woke up." "Oh, Dad, tomorrow is Saturday. You said you'd take me to the amusement park." Ethan nodded and smiled as he talked to him. I felt like an outsider, sitting on the chair watching them. When Ethan carried Xiao Bao upstairs, he finally remembered I was downstairs. He said to me, "I'll pretend this never happened. Just focus on taking care of Xiao Bao from now on." I looked up, watched his departing figure, and slowly buried my face in my arms. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Today, Ethan was rare to be home. He and Xiao Bao were sitting on the chair having breakfast. When I arrived, the maid brought my meal. Halfway through the meal, Ethan's phone rang. I didn't know what was said on the other end, but his expression changed immediately. He quickly stood up, grabbed his coat, and rushed out the door. Xiao Bao's father had something to do today, and might not be able to take him to the park. So he told him to ask his mother to go instead. He didn't wait for Xiao Bao to respond and just left. Xiao Bao was a bit upset and muttered, "I don't want Mom to take me." He ran upstairs. I've gotten used to it. Xiao Bao hasn't liked me much since he was 2 years old. Whenever he's upset, he acts like a spoiled child, throwing things around. But he's particularly attentive to that Emily auntie, making it seem like she's his biological mother. After I went upstairs, my phone buzzed, and I received another unfamiliar text message. I opened it to find a photo. In the photo, Ethan looked worried, holding the hand of the woman in the hospital bed. I recognized the woman. She was Emily. Ethan's secretary, and a childhood friend who seemed particularly important to him. She was also little Bao's favorite Emily auntie. I didn't say anything. I just saved the photo and planned to log out. Then another message came in. It was a video. In the video, Ethan lowered his head, pressed his forehead against a woman's forehead, and said, "Thank goodness the fever's gone down. Next time you get sick, tell me sooner, okay?" Though the video was only 10 seconds long, Ethan's concern was evident, and the woman looked like his wife. I couldn't help but call him. No one answered the first time, and the second call was hung up, though I knew the outcome. I called a third time. This time, someone finally answered. "What's wrong?" His cold tone made the words I was about to say get stuck in my throat, after waiting for a moment without hearing my response. His tone grew even worse. "Sophia, what happened?" I asked, lowering my head. "What are you doing, working?" Before I could finish, someone else interrupted, saying, "Ethan, Emily said she's feeling a bit unwell." Ethan hung up immediately without saying another word. I stared at my phone, smiling faintly. "Sophia, what are you still hoping for? The Ethan who once loved you changed 2 years ago. Don't wait anymore." Since then, Ethan seemed to get busier and busier, and I often received unfamiliar text messages on my phone. Each message contained photos of Ethan and Emily. Sometimes they were holding hands by the beach, sometimes in a restaurant, and sometimes in a hotel. I saved them all in an album, doing nothing else with them. That evening, the assistant knocked on the door, came in, nodded at me, and said, "Madam, I'm here to fetch some clothes for Ethan." I casually asked, "What's he busy with?" The assistant paused his movements and said, "Sorry, I'm not very familiar with Ethan's schedule." He knew I wouldn't believe that answer, but he didn't say anything else. I didn't ask either, because the result would be the same. It wasn't a big deal. Before leaving, I told him, "Please let him know I have something to discuss with him. Let me know when he's free." The assistant nodded and left. The room grew quiet again. I sat on the sofa, staring at the wedding photos on the table. At the time, he had left the Smith family to marry me, so we didn't have a wedding or take wedding photos. We just got a marriage certificate. I still remember that day, June 1st. He smiled and massaged my shoulders, saying, "Dear, I have a surprise for you." When we arrived at the destination, he was wearing a simple suit and put a wedding veil on my head. He held my hand and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a grand wedding." In that desolate open field, with no friends or family, no onlookers, I was still very happy to marry him. At that time, to support the family, he was under a lot of pressure. Couldn't find a good job, and had to work as a deliveryman or take odd jobs. To take wedding photos for me, he almost went without food and clothing for an entire year to save enough money. 3 years after our marriage, Ethan's father's health began to decline, so he called Ethan back, and as a result, he had to accept me as his wife, despite our mismatched family backgrounds. On his first day taking over the company, Ethan took my hand and wanted to take a series of particularly lavish wedding photos for me. I refused, because those wedding photos were special to me. I didn't care how much they were worth. I cared more about his sincerity and love at that moment. But now, I smiled gently, reached out to take the photo frame, and saw his youthful smile in the photo, feeling a pang of sadness. "What are you looking at?" Ethan had come back to me without me noticing, and he hugged me from behind. He turned his head to see the wedding photo from 4 years ago and smiled slightly. "Honey, why don't we have another wedding? This photo isn't very nice. It looks a bit cheap." Tears suddenly fell onto the photo album where our hands were holding each other. Ethan looked at me in confusion. "Why are you crying?" The memories I was crying about seemed insignificant in his eyes. In the end, I didn't say anything, just wiped away my tears. Then I pushed him away and stood up to sit on the side. The scent of his perfume made me feel uncomfortable. Ethan saw this and his expression changed, looking at me with some impatience. "I've been comforting you. What more do you want? Can't you be as obedient as Emily?" Then he went upstairs, and I put the photo frame back in the drawer and didn't take it out again. Today is June 1st, Children's Day, and Zio Bao's school has an activity that requires parents to attend. At the kindergarten, Zio Bao immediately saw Ethan standing next to me. He ran over quickly, was hugged by Ethan, looked around and asked, "Dad, where's Emily auntie?" Hearing this, my expression turned a bit sour. But Zio Bao didn't notice and instead started demanding that Emily auntie come over. Ethan looked at me with a troubled expression, but I just smiled. He probably wanted Emily to come over too. I looked down at Zio Bao, who was sitting on the ground throwing a tantrum, and felt a pang of sadness in my heart. I rubbed my chest and my face turned pale. Ethan saw this and asked me softly, "Are you okay?" I shook my head and said, "I'm fine, I just feel a little unwell. You guys go play." Ethan wanted to say something else, but I had already left. After arriving at the rest area, I sat on a chair and looked at the father and son not far away. Xiaobao heard that Emily was coming and immediately jumped up from the ground, bouncing around happily. At that moment, a little boy holding a jelly came over. He lifted his round head and asked worriedly, "Auntie, are you okay? Do you feel unwell?" I looked down and saw that he was a child, so I smiled. "Yes, Auntie feels a little unwell." The little boy thought for a moment, then handed me the jelly he was holding. He said, "Auntie, eat this." I saw the pink heart-shaped jelly in my hand and couldn't help but smile. This was the first time I had ever received a gift from a child. I hadn't even received a gift from Xiaobao. I put away my sadness and reached out to touch the little boy's hair, which felt soft and different from Xiaobao's hair. Xiaobao's hair was like his father's, a bit hard and prickly. "Thank you, little boy. Where are your parents?" The little boy looked a bit sad and said, "I don't have a father or mother." I didn't know how to respond, but the little boy gave me a sweet smile, as if he didn't mind. "It's okay, I have an uncle and he's a great designer." Before long, the little boy told me everything about his family. I sighed, feeling both heartbroken and helpless. Why was he willing to tell me everything? I reached out and hugged him, gently rubbing his head. The little boy suddenly looked up at me and asked, "Can I call you Mom?" I looked into his clear eyes, about to agree, but was interrupted by a voice. "Let go of my mom." Xiaobao rushed over like a little rocket and pulled the little boy out of my arms. Dropping him to the ground, I froze for a moment, then quickly knelt down to check on him. Luckily, he wasn't hurt. "Xiaobao, how could you treat your classmate like that?" This was the first time I had ever spoken to him so seriously, and Xiaobao froze in place. After a long moment, he looked at me in disbelief. "Mom, you're so mean." He started crying as soon as he finished speaking. Just then, Ethan and Emily walked over. Emily immediately hugged Xiaobao, wiped away his tears, and turned to me. "Sophia, Xiaobao is just a child. Why are you being so strict with him?" I was already in a bad mood, and seeing her made it worse. "How I raise my child is none of your business." Emily's eyes immediately turned red, and she hurriedly turned to look at Ethan. At that moment, Xiaobao stopped crying, walked out, stood in front of Emily, and shouted at me, "You can't bully Aunt Emily. Bad mom. Auntie isn't bad, you're the bad one." The little boy in my arms suddenly stood up and spoke. The scene became chaotic. Xiaobao rushed forward to hit someone, and I instinctively pushed him away. As a result, Xiaobao fell to the ground. When Emily suddenly screamed, Xiaobao started crying again. Ethan's expression turned grim. He suddenly looked at the little boy in my arms. I quickly hugged him tightly, blocking Ethan's view. Ethan looked displeased. "Sophia, remember who your son is." I didn't say anything and turned around to hand the little boy to his teacher. Back home, Xiaobao was still crying in Emily's arms, and Emily comforted him gently. At that moment, Ethan suddenly said, "Sophia, apologize to Xiaobao." I sat on the sofa, looked up at him, and asked, "What should I apologize for?" "You pushed Xiaobao. Don't you need to apologize?" Ethan seemed a little annoyed. He pinched his nose and looked at me. I said, "I'm his mother. Isn't it my responsibility to teach him?" Before Ethan could speak, Emily spoke again. "But you shouldn't have pushed Xiaobao either." What if he had lost his balance and fallen? Ethan heard this and frowned again. I couldn't help but laugh and asked, "Why do you have the right to interfere in our family affairs?" Emily opened her mouth but couldn't say anything, and finally lowered her head in distress. Xiaobao was crying and sniffling, still wanting to protect Emily. "I don't like you? I don't want you to be my mom. I want Emily." I didn't respond but turned to look at Ethan. He remained calm and said, "Xiaobao." Xiaobao immediately quieted down. Seeing this, I couldn't help but laugh. He was always so assertive in front of me, but he was actually afraid of Ethan. Emily saw this and gently patted Xiaobao's back, then looked up at Ethan and said, "Don't be so harsh with the child." The sight of the three of them made me feel like an outsider. Seeing the obvious softening in Ethan's expression and the warmth in his eyes, I felt uneasy and turned to go upstairs. I took out my phone to contact a lawyer, preparing to divorce. At that moment, I realized that no matter how long I waited, I couldn't change the relationship between father and son. If that was the case, what was the point of staying in this suffocating room? I decided to leave, go to work, and travel. That evening, Ethan suddenly called and asked me to come back home for a family dinner. Thinking this might be the last time, I agreed. As soon as I walked in, I heard my mother-in-law holding Emily's hand and saying regretfully, "You were the one I had my hopes set on as my daughter-in-law." But Ethan insisted on marrying that wild girl. If you hadn't gone abroad, Sophia wouldn't have had a chance. Emily smiled gently. "It's okay, Auntie. As long as Ethan is happy, I'm willing to stay by his side forever." I saw the sweet smile on my mother-in-law's lips and felt a bit surprised. I've been with the Smith family for 3 years now. Since giving birth to little Bao, she hasn't shown me any kindness. Every time she sees me, she insults me, saying I'm just a plain girl from the mountains who doesn't deserve her precious son. Whenever I felt wronged, Ethan would always say this: "Honey, don't take it to heart. My mom is just like that. She's not very sweet with her words, but she's actually a good person." At that moment, I realized she could speak so gently to someone else. Ethan suddenly appeared behind me and asked, "Why aren't you going in?" I turned around and asked him, "Family dinner? Why is Emily here too?" Ethan glanced inside and said, "I don't know, probably Mom called her." I didn't say anything else and turned to walk inside with him. At the dinner table, my mother-in-law kept serving Emily food and said, "Eat more, look how skinny you are." I looked down at myself and remembered how. Right after giving birth to our little one, my body hadn't fully recovered yet, but my appetite was still very good. Back then, my mother-in-law had said, "Eat less, you're already so fat." Since then, I've been controlling my diet, which has led to digestive issues now. I lowered my head, took a deep breath, and pretended not to hear anything, continuing to eat. However, my mother-in-law seemed to deliberately bring up the topic again. "Ethan, you used to like Emily so much. I thought you'd marry her. I never expected." After saying that, she glanced at me unintentionally. Ethan frowned but didn't say anything. It wasn't until half a year later that I found out Ethan had once liked Emily. But they broke up because she went abroad, which is why he ended up with me. Now that the topic has come up again, I'm no longer as angry as before. So I wiped my mouth, stood up and said, "Sophia, you don't have to beat around the bush. I married your son with a clean slate and I haven't done anything to wrong him in the past 6 years. Since you like Emily so much, why not wait until I divorce your son and marry her then?" After saying that, I didn't look at the Smith family's displeased expressions and turned to leave. Ethan hurriedly stood up and chased after me, grabbing my wrist and asking, "What does this mean?" I pushed his hand away and took a step back. "Don't you understand? Ethan, I've decided to divorce you. I've already filed the papers with the court. If there are any issues, please contact my lawyer." As I left, I couldn't help but think back to 6 years ago. At that time, I had just graduated from art school, but had to take a year off due to illness. The following year, he said he wanted to take me to meet his parents. I thought to myself, someone as outstanding as him must have an equally outstanding family. But when I met his parents, their eyes were filled with contempt, and their words implied my status. An orphan with nothing was unworthy of their son. I thought this relationship was over, but then Ethan stepped forward and said firmly to them, "Dad and Mom, I love Sophia and want to marry her." Ethan's father tried to persuade him several times, but to no avail. Finally, he couldn't contain his anger and slapped Ethan across the face. Despite that, he stood in front of me, shielding me with his body. Later, his parents agreed, but he lost his status as the heir. As we walked out the door, he smiled at me, pointing to his swollen face, and asked, "Now I'm just a penniless young man too. Will you still marry me?" I remember I said yes. After marrying him, to avoid him working so hard alone, I gave up my high-paying job and moved into a small rental apartment with him, talking about our future life. He worked very hard, willing to do any job, but didn't want me to suffer because he said, "I married you so we could enjoy life together, not so you'd suffer." From then on, I became a housewife, handling household chores and doing laundry every day. Every time he came home, he would use his last bit of money to buy me flowers and dumplings, while he ate instant noodles in the hallway. At that moment, I felt that all my previous sacrifices were worth it. It wasn't until Ethan's father's health began to deteriorate that they called Ethan back and reluctantly acknowledged me as their daughter-in-law. 3 years after our marriage, I gave birth to our son under immense pressure. He was a boy, and my mother-in-law finally started treating me a little better. What was he doing at that time? I couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Actually, he was kissing Emily at the company. That photo is still in my photo album. After the Smith family left, I couldn't wait to share this surprise with my best friend. Although we hadn't completely divorced yet, the evidence I had was enough for the court to grant us a divorce. Lily was very happy to hear the news and immediately invited me to her workplace. I agreed because I had studied design. Plus, Lily's company was hiring designers at the time. At the airport, I quickly bought a ticket to New York and didn't feel at ease until I was on the plane. After the plane took off, I opened the window and stared blankly at the sky outside. Suddenly, I heard crying from beside me and turned to see a mother holding a baby who was crying. The mother looked exhausted, while her husband beside her slept soundly. The contrast was striking. The mother comforted the crying baby in her arms while nudging her husband and shouting, "Wake up and help prepare the baby's milk." The husband rolled over and continued sleeping, and eventually the flight attendant stepped in to help prepare the formula. The baby stopped crying and drank the milk quietly, but the mother was in tears. This reminded me of myself in the past. Although I had hired a nanny, I still felt very tired most of the time, taking care of the child on my own. Until the day the child was a month old, I passed by my mother-in-law's room and overheard something. "Mom, don't let Sophia find out about the nanny." Ethan sat on the chair, frowning as he instructed her. My mother-in-law nodded immediately and said, "Don't worry. I won't let her know that the nanny is fake. Besides, every child is raised by their mother with hard work. Let her practice more, she'll get used to it next time." Standing outside the door, I felt a chill run through my body. I wanted to move but felt as though my legs were made of lead. Unable to budge. No wonder the nanny always dodged questions when faced with childcare issues. No wonder the child had always been under my care. So this was my mother-in-law's thinking. And Ethan knew about it too. What did those words of comfort mean that night? I took a deep breath and buried those unpleasant memories deep within my heart. The mother on the plane had stopped crying. She gently patted her child's back, her face bearing a helpless smile. I turned my head and continued staring out the window at the clouds. But my heart couldn't find peace. The plane landed in New York. I followed the crowd out of the airport and took a deep breath of the fresh air. "Sophia." I heard the call and turned to see Lily waving at me at the exit. She wore a warm, sincere smile and ran over to give me a big hug. "You're finally here? Let's go, the food I made is getting cold," Lily said as she helped me put my luggage in the trunk. "Let me know your plans for the rest of the day." I smiled and nodded. After arriving at Lily's house, she had me sit on the sofa while she went to the kitchen to prepare the meal. Once she brought the dishes to the table. I washed my hands and sat down at the dining table, eating and chatting with her. "Are you really planning to get a divorce?" Lily looked up at me uncertainly while eating. I put down my chopsticks and rested my chin on my hand, thinking, "Yes, I've made up my mind." Lily immediately smiled and served me a dish, saying, "Back in school? The teacher loved you the most and even said she'd recommend you to her husband's company after you graduated. Who would have thought you'd end up getting married and becoming a housewife?" Lily and I grew up together and even attended the same university. She has an outgoing personality and speaks her mind, so I didn't take her words as a jab. Back then, I was truly infatuated with her. There was nothing I could do about it. He really loved me back then, but we just couldn't withstand the test of time. Lily could see right through me. She sighed but still comforted me. She said, "Your design sketches were even praised by the old professors at school. They said they had a unique style. Although some time has passed, I believe you can still do it." Seeing her encourage me, I felt filled with confidence. The next day, I got up early, put on the professional outfit I had carefully selected, prepared my resume, and headed to the company Lily had mentioned for the interview. The company was located in a skyscraper in the city center, and through the glass walls, you could see the bustling cityscape below. I took a deep breath and walked into the company's reception area. The director conducting the interview was named Daniel. I had heard he had a quirky personality and was quite sharp-tongued. I cautiously looked up at him, feeling his strong presence, even stronger than Ethan's. He suddenly turned around and I saw his eyes, a faint cold brown, quite attractive, but they also made him seem unapproachable. Daniel took my resume, paused his gaze on my name, then began flipping through it. His eyes were focused as if searching for something, such good academic records, yet no work experience. He looked up, his tone tinged with a hint of doubt. I nodded awkwardly. Yes. Why? He continued, because I'm married. My voice grew softer, and a wave of inexplicable shame welled up inside me. Daniel couldn't help but furrow his brows. That's unwise? His voice was cold and direct, sending a chill down my spine. I never expected to get the job after the interview. I thought I had no chance. Daniel stood up and looked at me again. His voice was still cold and hard, but now it carried a hint of unwavering command. In 3 months, I hope to see your outstanding performance. He said this and walked out of the interview room. After starting work, I was constantly busy, working so hard that my head spun. When the school phone rang, I put down my pen and found a place where no one could see me. As soon as I answered, the teacher spoke urgently. Mtkes Xiao Bao's mother, please come to the school immediately. Xiao Bao got into a fight with other students and was injured. I instinctively gripped the phone tightly, but quickly let go. I'm sorry, teacher. Could you please ask his father to come? I'm very busy and don't have time. Before the teacher could respond, Xiao Bao, who was beside me, couldn't hold back his tears. Mom, please come and pick me up. I want to go home. I couldn't help but smile, but I patiently asked, why did you fight with your classmates? Xiao Bao angrily said, he said Emily Auntie was bad, so I hit him. Hearing this, I didn't say anything. The person on the other end seemed to sense something and remained silent. Last year, when I went to pick him up from kindergarten, his classmates were asking, is that your mom, Xiao Bao? I was about to respond when Xiao Bao suddenly got angry. I don't want you to be my mom. Why are you picking me up? Where's Emily Auntie? Did you chase Emily Auntie away again? You're so mean. What does it feel like to be spoken to like that by your own son? At that moment, even though it was summer, a breeze blew and my body felt a bit cold. Xiao Bao, if you want to go home, go find Ethan or Emily Auntie. Don't bother me. Ems Wang, I'm sorry. My husband and I are about to get divorced and I can't take care of the child anymore. Please don't call me again. Thank you. After saying that, I hung up the phone and turned to leave, noticing Daniel, the director, behind me. Just as I felt a bit awkward and didn't know what to say, the phone rang again. This time it was his call. When the call connected, Daniel looked expressionless, but I could tell he was angry. After hanging up, he looked up at me and said he had something to handle and asked me to submit the draft to Mia for review. I nodded and left with him. After handing the design draft to Mia, I took 2 days off. I needed to go back to get the divorce decree, although it could be mailed. I still wanted to go in person. Upon arriving at the destination, I went to the law firm and obtained my divorce decree. Just as I was about to leave, I suddenly received a call that made me stop. On the other end of the line, at the kindergarten, Xiao Bao was sitting on a small stool with a bruise on his cheek, while Ethan stood behind him. On the other side, it was my boss Daniel, and behind him was a little boy with injuries on his face. Upon closer inspection, it seemed to be the same little boy who had delivered the jelly to me last time. Xiao Bao saw me and immediately ran over, hugging me tightly and saying, Mom, why did you take so long? I looked down at him, then at Ethan. What happened? Daniel noticed me but didn't say anything. I could only pull Xiao Bao to Ethan's side, let go of his hand and step back. Xiao Bao looked up at me sadly and asked, Mom, are you abandoning Xiao Bao? I tried to suppress the sadness in my heart. Isn't this what you've always wanted? You should be happy now. Xiao Bao lowered his head, and tears began to flow. I didn't plan to comfort him, but turned to look at the kindergarten teacher beside me. The teacher explained to me that the little boy who had fought with Xiao Bao yesterday was named Daniel Jr. Daniel Jr. was holding onto Daniel's sleeve, looking wronged and called out, Uncle. So they were uncle and nephew, I thought to myself. In the end, Xiao Bao apologized, and the little boy transferred schools. As we were leaving, Ethan suddenly called out to me. His voice sounded tired. Sophia, come back. Xiao Bao needs you. I couldn't help but laugh. Do you think taking care of the kids is too hard? Then you can ask Emily Auntie to come over. She should be happy to help take care of Xiao Bao. In the past, whenever Xiao Bao and I had a small argument, he would send Xiao Bao to Emily's place. Ethan took a deep breath, unsure of what to say, but I didn't have time to wait for him. I had work to finish. He turned around, about to leave, but couldn't help asking me, do you really not need me and little Bao anymore? I looked back at him, didn't say anything, just took the photo out of my bag and handed it to him. Seeing the change on his face and his panicked expression, I couldn't help but laugh. On the day the competition ended, I successfully stayed on. To celebrate my success, Lily cooked a few dishes at home and even bought some wine. In the end, she got completely drunk, stood on the sofa, raised her glass, and said, "Celebrating my precious Sophia successfully getting out of her love troubles and now becoming my colleague." I looked up, smiled, clinked glasses with her, and took a sip. "Thank you. Be careful, don't fall, come down quickly." I had a hard time pulling Lily down from the sofa, and she collapsed into my arms and fell asleep. I helplessly dragged her into the bedroom and got up to tidy the living room. After I finished cleaning the living room, I took the remaining wine and sat on the swing chair on the balcony. The night breeze gently blew, and the wind chimes hanging on the money tree jingled softly. Suddenly, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw it was my university teacher. We hadn't been in touch since I got married. She was disappointed that I had given up my career for love, so she hadn't spoken to me since. After answering the call, I didn't know what to say at first. "I heard Lily say you're divorced." Her voice carried the weight of the years. I murmured a soft yes. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then she sighed and said, "Things will get better." Her gentle words of comfort felt like a mother's concern, making me want to cry. We talked for a long time, from when I was in school to her disappointment in me. Finally, she said something else. "I've always liked you. I hope you can seize this opportunity and show your strengths. You're smart and talented, and you have a strong sense of independence, but sometimes you need to let go of your own ideas and listen to others' opinions. I believe in you, Sophia." After hanging up, I composed myself, got up, and put on some clothes, intending to go downstairs to throw out the trash, but I ran into Ethan. He looked exhausted, his hair disheveled, and he seemed a bit pitiful. He used to care so much about his appearance, but I quickly snapped out of it and tried to leave. To my surprise, Ethan hurried over, grabbed my wrist, and tried to hug me. I pushed him away. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. Since returning to the Smith family, he hadn't shed a single tear. This was the first time. He began to explain that he had never liked Emily, and it wasn't because she had gone abroad that he had been with me. He had always loved only me. After 3 years of waiting, I finally heard this explanation, but I no longer felt anything. We were already divorced, and the misunderstandings of the past no longer mattered to me. "Ethan, I really don't care, and I don't want to hear any more." Ethan heard this and lowered his head, looking like a child who had done something wrong. Even when he was criticized by the principal in school, he had never reacted like this. "Ethan, do you remember what you said 6 years ago in front of my mother-in-law?" He looked up at me in confusion, and I just smiled. Sure enough, only I remembered those words. I looked into his amber eyes and said, "You said I'm an orphan, and it doesn't matter that I have no family, because you'll give me a home, a warm and happy home." Ethan heard these words and seemed to freeze for a moment, as the vows he had made long ago, which had grown faint over time, surged back into his mind like memories covered in dust. Though he wanted to say something, his lips trembled for a while before he finally couldn't bring himself to speak. I continued, "Later, you gave me a home, and it was truly warm and happy. At first, there were just the two of us, then we became 3, but eventually, I was left alone again." I looked at his familiar face, my eyes brimming with tears of emotion. I wanted to cry and tell him about all the unhappiness and grievances I'd endured over the years, but when the words reached my lips, I decided against it. Before leaving, I told him, "Zaya Abao really likes Emily, and I've noticed she has feelings for you too. If you're worried she'll feel inferior without a mother figure, you could consider marrying her." Ethan grabbed my wrist again and said, "But you're Zaya Bao's biological mother." I broke free from his tight grip. "He's only 3 years old. When he grows up, he'll forget me anyway. So who his biological mother is doesn't really matter anymore, Ethan." Before I knew it, it was the end of the year. On New Year's Day, I received unexpected news from my boss. "Let's spend the holiday together." I was a bit confused, but still prepared a gift and rang Daniel's doorbell. When the door opened, Daniel looked surprised and asked, "It's so cold. Why did you come over?" I was a bit confused. Didn't he call me over? Seeing Daniel Jr. hiding behind Daniel, I finally understood. With no choice, I forced myself to say, "I came to celebrate the new year with you." "Happy New Year, Daniel." He took my gift and silently replied, I thought that was the end of it, but he said again, "Happy New Year." I turned around and saw his cold brown eyes, smiled, and walked over to joke, "Director, why are your ears red?" he said. "It's because it's cold."